What I have is the ability to paint. And so I decided after Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy that I was going to use the bully pulpit that I own, which is, my painting arm, to speak to these issues. But I want to go back in time. I'm always curious if, this is kind of where I started. Midwest, working class Catholic family, Peoria, Illinois, pretty much buttoned up like that. But very quickly, this is the kind of house we were brought up in. We moved to California when I was very young, and it was right around the hippie movement. And so there was a marked difference between those Midwest beginnings and what I was to come to see. This was our first family trip. It was the Winchester Mystery House. Everybody know what this is? It's it's so interesting.
77 or something.
Well, you want to tell them? It's a great story. Yeah, well, they're making a movie about it. So Mrs. Winchester, the heir to the Winchester rifle fortune, the widow, when he died, a medium told her that the ghosts of all the people killed by the Winchester rifle would haunt her unless she continued to build onto her mansion, her Victorian mansion. So you're seeing, how many rooms is it, Bob?
It was like 277.
277. So I was this little kid coming from, that, and this was, kind of like this could also be the world. So definitely these kinds of things filter into your subconscious. Yeah, there were rooms that lead, doorways that lead to nowhere, false stairways. Really, really interesting, weird mind. And lo and behold, years later, that sensibility of the niches that hold our thoughts and our secrets work its way into the work. But there was no art in our home except for one portrait of this guy, and given this was what I thought men looked like, to see that men could look like that. Kind of gender bendy, long hair, was radical. And again, no art in the house, but you'd open the medicine chests and you'd find these holy cards that would take you like wormholes into these different realities. The Catholic Church has had problems, and I've made my peace with it, but I'm very grateful that I was brought up Catholic, because of the rich world of imagery that it gave me, and a lot of other reasons too. And this not being the least of them. And there were powerful figures in that tradition. The saints that would sacrifice their eyeballs for their beliefs. And as a little girl, wondering what her heroism was, I wanted to honor that kind of deep belief system. But this was the kind of work that was current as I was making my way into art making. It used Santa Cruz. It was minimalism. You go to the museums. It was minimalism or conceptual art. Pierre Manzoni canning his own feces, which is great. I'm very. All good art is undergirded by a powerful concept. But, I was wanting to deal with these powerful figures of my past. So this painting happened. This is called Self-Portrait as Infanta Maria Teresa, Dreaming Madame de Sade. I painted it in 1999. I graduated from MFA at Yale in 1985. So that's 14 years before I made the first painting that I could stand behind, that I didn't roll up and throw into my basement. And one of the reasons that I embraced it was this idea of the layers. I was extremely taken when I was 18. I gathered up my waitressing money and went to Spain, to the Prado, to see and saw this incredible Velázquez, and it changed my life with the way that she looks like such a vulnerable creature. There's such a psychological pathos in her face, and yet her hair, the sculpture of her hair is mirrored in the sculpture of her body, and she was, Infanta Maria Theresa was married to this guy, Louis the Sun King. And so I was fascinated by that idea because she was a very humble, and homely, religious woman, and he was Louis the Sun King, with all that you see there. So I was fascinated by, what was that relationship like as I'm painting away? These are the kinds of things that enter my head. And then Madame de Sade was also a kind of a humble woman of means, but with no title, married to the Marquis de Sade, who was the first writer of pornographic literature. He was also, an aristocrat, and one of the people who brought down who ushered in the French Revolution. So he was a revolutionary. So, all of that kind of was going into this painting, and there she is with her little attributes, kind of like way back here, with Saint Agnes and her eyeballs. Her attributes are these little snarling lemurs, and that's kind of what I thought the painting was about. Until I was on a train going to a lecture, one of my own lectures, thinking about what I was going to say, and I suddenly had this memory of moving to the San Francisco Bay Area, right again during the summer of love, and taking a family picnic trip to Golden Gate Park, where there were, hippies all over the place dancing, and you remember, the Beaver Cleaver home that I came from, and out of the bushes came this hippie, not quite him, but sort of like him, wearing only a cape and a jockstrap. And my mother, being horrified, and the hippies looking like this guy, that I was familiar with. And the combination of the picnic basket and those hippies all kind of conjoined in association. There's a picnic basket of her hair to be the real sort of underpinnings of this painting. The idea that memory and powerful association are, we can have our conceptual structures, but it's really those deep, sort of abiding memories that are really the stuff, I think, of the imaginative world. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how these paintings come about. Now I'm going to go back in time. Right after grad school, I got a Fulbright to what was at the time West Berlin. Now it's just Berlin. Everybody remembers that Berlin was divided down the middle overnight, practically by the wall, after the war. East Berlin, West Berlin, and that was, there was figurative art had been pretty much, not done for several decades. And this was in the mid-'80s when it was coming back, and it was especially strong in Germany with Neo-Expressionism. And so the whole conversation around what figuration can do for a discussion of politics and values was happening on either side of the wall. On the west side, they were using the figure over here, the Ray Smith, to speak against humanism, that it didn't work, it was a project that didn't work, that it resulted in these terrible world wars and the beastliness of humankind. Whereas in the East, they had this new belief system called socialism that they were using old master technique to propagandize for. Old master technique is very a great technique for glorifying its subject, whether it be kings and queens or a political system. So in that environment, I was over in the West making these really big paintings using Neo-Expressionism to speak about, the fecklessness of humankind, how all our efforts are throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and using satire to kind of fuel my project. But what I was discovering when I was looking at art, in that time in Europe, and I was doing a lot of museum hopping, was the kind of work I was attracted to was not that sort of bombastic, angry stuff. It was, flowers so bright that they're falling out of the vase. And there's something, subversive in that beauty. Or this unswept floor of Sosos, where it's a mosaic about just, kitchen detritus. And there was something so powerful about that. I loved it. But I was making these kinds of, again, they were big, they were 8 feet, I was mad, I was young and had to, scream about it. And they were exhilarating to make, but as I would finish them, I would feel like there was some disconnect between what I had painted and something inherent to who I am. So that was the time. I think maybe I had put in my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, but I started to get this surfeit of images that would flow into my brain when I would relax after a day of painting. I'd lay back in exhaustion, and I would see these pictures flooding into my head that were not memories or daydreams. They were like somebody else's movie still. And they were really intriguing. And so, at this crisis point where this was feeling too negative, I thought that I needed to, if there was a source of creativity, maybe this was it, and I needed to own it and follow it. So I started to change. I completely changed what I had been doing. I made paintings that I would throw a lot of solvent at to literally dissolve, to try to get that out of my system. And then using still life as kind of an excuse for what I call the thought bubbles, these little images that are, I've come to find out, it's called image streaming. And it's related to theta wave activity. Those little images would then be juxtaposed on the fruit. And it gave me a way to kind of crawl inside my subconscious and reflect. So I did a lot of these, and all the time I'm thinking that the still life was just an excuse. And it was really sort of a Freudian therapy where I'd be painting one, it would suggest another one, so I'd paint it, and I could muse as I was painting. And I would call them self-portraits because they were like a little interior mirror held up to the subconscious. Self-portrait is wreck, self-portrait is disaster area, self-portrait is fallen angel. And then I stumbled across a book by Norman Bryson called Looking at the Overlooked, which is a wonderful book about the history of still life painting. And he disabused me of the idea that still life was just a minor genre. That in fact, still life, Juan Sanchez de Cotin is logging the logarithmic pattern of the universe with these parsnips. And Peter Erickson over here in the butcher's stall is doing something similar to what I was doing, where the sacred image is the little kind of thought bubble in the back with Mary giving alms to the beggar. And then the image in the front is the butcher's stall, something very common and everyday. So this idea of the shifting of hierarchies, where you think it's just a straightforward still life, and then you come up closer and there's all this other activity going on. The self-portrait is gourmand, living in Berlin, and the corpses under the ground of Germany at the time. I wanted to work out. And what I was discovering slowly is that some of these little thought bubbles, which were only, again, the size of a brain, would slowly grow into bigger paintings later on. So they were like sowing the seeds of later paintings, I discovered in time. Anyway, then this painting came along. I was pregnant for the first time, still under the idea that the still life was minor, and then I stepped back from this painting and realized that the sort of dark richness and ugliness of this world was similar to kind of the weird growth, happening in your womb as you're bringing a child, into development. The kind of weird mystery and scariness of it. And so I called it birth painting, and I finished it with this text. I opened up my legs and the boy fell out of me. So that was, yeah, it wasn't quite that easy, but that allowed me to move on. Again, you know, life events happen and change the course of our work. I hadn't been painting the figures since an undergrad in figure painting classes because of all the problems that we had uncovered through critical theory, the objectification of women, the male gaze being a real issue, and I didn't want to deal with that. The nude had been used and overused until I had my own personal experience with what turned out. You're not my phone either. Yeah, let's all turn our phones off. I'll work out that later. I was having abdominal pain. I thought it was a miscarriage. It got acute. I stumbled to Methodist Hospital in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where I live, and it turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy in the fallopian tube, and I didn't even know what that was. And they, you know, took it out, and I was fine. But that event connected me to all the women of the past who died in childbirth. And there was just a beautiful piece about Mary Shelley and all of her pregnancies, and, you know, Frankenstein being the result of that, you know, experience of things growing that we, you know, that kill us. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's like an appendix where a topic where if it's pregnancy in the fallopian tube, if it ruptures, you die. And so suddenly, with, you know, the idea that I hadn't died, that all I had was a bandage, gave me in a relationship to the female nude that had nothing to do with the male gaze and the objectification of the female and all that other stuff. It was my own lived experience as a female body that happened to survive childbirth. And so I wanted to make paintings about you know, using that idea of the female nude, not the one that had been, you know, so thoroughly analyzed by critical theory. And at the same time, Dave Hickey came out with this wonderful book, Invisible Dragon, 4 essays on beauty, where he reintroduced the word beauty to the art conversation, which had been kind of out since Ruskin in the 19th century. He's talking about beauty enfranchises the viewer, which is so true. And, you know, all through modernism, beauty was rejected. But he also talked about, Dave Hickey, about two different kinds of space. Masculine space that kind of pushes out at you like Caravaggio, and feminine space that invites you to enter it like the Tiepolo. And I had been doing paintings like this, landscapes that would invite you to enter them more and more deeply. And the belief system that undergirded this work had to do with feminism and wanting to bring female experience to old master technique, the technique that had been you know, pretty much owned by men, white males. So as a female, I wanted to bring my own experience, and then to discover through Dave Hickey that the space itself was a kind of a feminine experience, you know, helped again fuel this work. So here's another one where you know, you enter the space of the painting through the perimeter of the canvas, and then you go deeper and deeper through these various hoops, and then all the way back to the Icarus figure falling into the pond, allowing you again to kind of spiral deeper and deeper into space, and hopefully deeper and deeper into your own meditative, you know, realm as a viewer. Here's another one, kind of a bad image, but I should take it out of my. But I love this pile of naked ladies, so that's what I put it in. And here's here's a detail. Again, taking you kind of deeper and deeper into the space that ends up being just paint. Here's another one, again, where you go through these various arches. But all throughout, I returned to the figure, and I was becoming more and more interested in the idea of this figure as kind of exploding. In this case, you know, her head is sort of exploding via the berries that she's in the midst of. Here's another one. I had 2 young boys. I was painting like a fiend. My creative life was kind of on fire, and these paintings really, you know, when I look back on them, they seem to be about that ripeness and that burgeoning forth. And again, sort of the brain exploding via the chandelier. And then as time goes on, I mean, I've painted a lot of these, and my body gets older, and the ripe fruit is replaced by the dead animals. You know, it happens. It happens. But still, you know, the brain is still alive. And again, and here's a few more. But all the while, those little thought bubbles of yore, you know, that I had talked about before, would make their way in through things like the wallpaper behind her, where my ironic jab at our foolishness, at the foolishness of humankind, would play itself out in these little scenarios behind her. So there was always kind of that sort of call and response, journalistic commentary as I was playing out these scenarios about my own personal metaphorical life. And so all the while, I am trafficking in, I'm absorbing as much powerful imagery as I can, living in New York, you know, having the luxury of traveling through Europe, and was starting to really kind of have this personal relationship to powerful images. I had become known as a narrative painter, and I had been invited to talk on a lot of panels about being a narrative painter. And you know, what's a narrative painting? A painting is a stilled moment, and a narrative is something that goes on in time. So what does that mean? So I thought about it and read a lot, and came across another great essay by Frank Kermode called Secrets and Narrativity. And he talks about in writing, in literature, how there's the superficial chronicle of events, and then key words that take you to a deeper level of meaning. And I was intrigued by that idea, and thinking about that in terms of, you know, painting, and was looking at this painting, and how what art historians say about it. This is obviously Vermeer, Woman in the Balance. It's predicated on all these triangles that say different things. There's compositionally, it's very taut with triangles that make you either think about divinity, a triangle that points up, or humanity, a triangle that points down. And historians say that Vermeer was asking the question, you know, where do we get satisfaction in life? From the divine or from worldly goods? And and art historians say that it's a draw, that Vermeer isn't answering that. But if you look closely, Vermeer does answer it, and it's in the composition itself, and this is part of what makes a narrative painting powerful in terms of its secrets. Right smack with the idea that there's all these triangles, right smack in the middle is one tiny little triangle that is created by the light on her fingers, 1, 2, 3, that mirrors all these little triangles and big triangles alike, and it's right smack in the middle of the painting, right between the line of that divides the divine light from the ascension, and which direction does that triangle point but up. So I remember saying to an art historian, no, he does answer it. He answers it in the painting. And that's an example of a secret and a bit of wisdom. Great paintings give you wisdom. I've been studying them for long enough to tell you assuredly that they do. So that idea of the secret is the kind of thing now that I look for in painting, and it's personal. My secret won't be necessarily your secret, but in this great painting of The Sacrifice of Isaac by Rembrandt, a lot of incredible things going on with the abstract components, the composition. But it was when my eye landed on the open hand, dropping the knife, keeping Isaac from being slaughtered, and then the spilled blood of the red cloud behind it that, you know, you have that intake of breath from the knowledge that you're in the presence of, you know, of wisdom. The cloud and the blood are conjoined. The release and the potential slaughter are conjoined. And it brings home metaphorically the idea that this man, you know, was almost going to slaughter his own son for the glory of God, but then was released from that. It's just beautiful. It makes your whole body shudder. And then this crazy painting by Bonnard, it's one of my favorite paintings for all these reasons of the power of hidden content. This is such a nutty painting. Has anybody seen this painting? In real life? Yeah?
I have a little picture of it in my room.
But did you see the original ever? Because it was at MoMA years ago when I didn't know anything, and I remember looking at it and just thinking, this is such a weird painting.
Yeah.
And then it was actually Eric Fischel, the great artist, who unpacked this for me, and I'm so forever grateful. So okay, Pierre Bonnard, wonderful modernist, considered a dauber by Picasso, you know, like a second-rate modernist, according to Picasso and Matisse. I think he's one of the great modernists. Married to a woman with an illness that made them leave Paris for the countryside. She spent a lot of time in the bathtub because of her illness, and yet he painted her all the time, but she hated to be looked at. She'd go out in public with a big hat on so nobody would look at her, and yet again she was painted all the time. And so there's this pathos of Bonnard wanting to connect to this woman, his wife, her turning her back on the, here she is, coming out of the bathtub, her back is to us. And there's hardly any paint on this painting. It's just scribbles, except for these clots of brown here and there on this funny thing. And again, art historians say, this funny thing, what is it? Is it in the midground, and is it a chair that a cloth has been thrown, a towel has been thrown over? Well, no, because if you look closer, you'll see little thumb and knuckles and little thumbs. So it's clearly something way in the foreground, like hands, like they could be viewers' hands or Bonnard's hands, holding this thing. And so what is he holding? And is he reading something? Well, why would it be so scribbly? Well, Eric Fischel said, if you look closely, the fact that there's only thick paint on these brown clots, he surmises that this is a man who stumbled into a woman, engaged in a very intimate moment. He's picked up this object that is the the crux of her difference from him. It's her minstrel rag. He's holding her minstrel rag. And when he said that, I said, there's never been a minstrel rag painted in art history. And it's so germane to half of humanity's lives. And so Bonnard painted a minstrel rag. Very powerful secret that, because that's not obviously something that you're supposed to make paintings about. So artist's job is to own the secrets and make them something we can talk about. It's a reality. Okay, so back to me. I'm again interested in these figures. I have two young sons. I'm aware of being so connected to them, and yet they are different. They have different bodies, and so my figures become kind of androgynous, carrying their own little phallic shapes. And it's one thing that the younger generation is making us aware of is that the gender is not a binary where you're male and female. There's points along the way where things get mixed up. So that becomes a very important thing for people to be aware of, which I wasn't thinking about painting these, but have come to be aware of since this generation of my students have been opening my eyes to that. And at the same time, politics continues to intervene. So at this point, the war in Iraq has broken out. The front page was the bombing of Iraq, and I was making this painting about the fireplace, and I wanted to engage with that horrifying front page picture, so it made its way to the top of the skirt. And but my point of painting is to find the image. I don't make sketches beforehand that I just follow. I have to find it as I'm painting. So I put that on, but it wasn't quite right. So I brought the birds in, and it wasn't quite right. And what you're not seeing is at the bottom. Oh shoot! Well, at the bottom of this is a pile of. But it's cut off because of the screen. So whatever. It's a pile of pods, and out of the pods are coming these moths. The pods are kind of giving birth to the moths, and the moths are attracted to the flame. And as they head towards the flame, they metamorphose into the birds and kind of make their way out. And so, but you can't see those pods, but you can believe that they're there. I'm telling you. This one as well, again, the war is going on. I'm thinking about the Treaty of Versailles, these aristocratic interiors that are the stuff of grandeur, and yet, you know, the power politics, you know, that's where power politics take root, in these grand interiors. So I wanted the ceiling mural to be kind of melting into the burning chandelier, and then the birds kind of making their way out. And there's the figures starting to kind of almost fall into the flame, but not quite, right? Not quite that far. This one as well, again, an aristocratic interior, but in this case, all of the great paintings that would be in such a place are showing, you know, plane crashes and monsters opening their maws to suck us in. So again, trying to show the machinations of power politics within these worlds. The chandeliers themselves are holding secret images that you have to find, you know, as your eye works across. But then back to the figures. At this point, my kids are getting older. They're starting to make their way out. I was interested in the idea of these kind of burgeoning heads as their brains are filling up with what they're learning from life. And again, with the burgeoning brain come the thoughts, and so the plates sort of suggest the different directions of thought you can go to with all the hidden pictures. Here's another one. Again, the commentary behind her as she's sitting on a kind of a flayed earth with all the monuments of the earth on that kind of carpet. And the idea of kind of opening your brain, I wanted to just play with that notion itself with no figures, and so I started a few of these. Again, the big sphere with the monuments was the initial idea, but it wasn't quite right, so I poked a hole in it and found these rooms inside the sphere that were interesting in taking me, you know, associatively to different places, but it still wasn't quite right. So the roller coaster of a pathway found its way into the painting from the wall around it, where you have to climb the ladder and then find your pathway, and they're all strewn with obstructions, stones, and broken areas. And the recognition in making that was that, you know, it's the journey inside that is as interesting as the. Thank you. I like you're nodding back there. Thank you. The journey inside is as compelling as what you find. So here, and realizing that it comes out of these advent calendars of my youth, where you would open these little doors and there would be a world behind it. Here's another one where I just kind of opened the whole thing. You can see underneath is a little campsite. Again, it's cut off by the bottom, but there's a little camping area, and then again, these mechanisms for making your way into the sphere. And then once you're inside, all the different little rooms. And the rooms, There's a specific event happening in each of the rooms that that I would kind of slowly uncover. I kind of paint with this, put a few dashes and then let them suggest something, but it has to become something specific, or it feels like I'm cheating. So and they all they kind of talk to each other, as you move from one to the other. So I get the pleasure of the associative connection. Our brains are marvelous things, and if we give them credit, they'll tell us great stories. So that's what I paint for, to get those stories. And at this point, my kids are, again, he's got feet. Imagine he has feet. It's very important that he has feet. He has big feet. And with those big feet, he's going to go off into the world. He was heading to college. He's a musician now. He's a beautiful musician. Bellows is the name of his band. And I wanted to outfit him with what he would need to go into the world. So he's got books, and he's got gree-gree bags, and he's got ropes and keys and all the like. And he's also got a backpack that's full of endangered animals and images of wisdom. Those things I was talking about before. Here's another one. This is a print where I was able to take those actual paintings and put reproductions inside the doors of the backpack. And those images of wisdom are things like the El Greco Fra Padavicino. I won't tell you why it's an image of wisdom, but it is, if you stare at it long enough, you will discover it. And it has to do with Manichaean ideas of black versus white, and up versus down, and heaven versus hell, and male versus female, and how they come together. So beautiful. Titian's Mary Magdalene. A meditation on suffering and how it disintegrates us through the fire of her hair that kind of cuts her body up into these head separated from breast, separated from arm. That's how we feel when we suffer. We feel disintegrated. And meditations on it can help us. So at this point, the financial crisis had happened, 2008. And I wanted to make a painting well, what do we need in this world to carry on? Do we need a hedge fund? I mean, maybe some of you are hedge fund people, and so I apologize. But it just seemed like, the rapid, greed was not helping us. So I wanted to make a world where there were images of wisdom all over, and different kinds of people, builders and inventors and dreamers and barriers of the old and lovers and mothers. The things that we need were all around in this world. There's the dreamers up there. And then here's my dreamer son. Again, going off to college, and I wanted him to be kind of in the thrall of this beautiful world, because it is a beautiful world. So there he is. Here's another one. I wanted to send him off with an idea of. I wanted to send him off with a burden. So I made him pregnant with this ball of fruit and turkeys, and I wanted to bind it to him so he could know what that's like, with the sawed-off tree boughs. And here's another one where the turkey ball, now he has to tend it with these ropes he can pull, and they're connected in such a way that if he pulls, the branches will move and cause the ship to water the turkey ball as the ropes push the water over, push the ship over to water the turkey ball. I wanted them to, have a sense of taking care of their world. So I'll just run through these next few. This is the point that Katrina has happened, and I'm thinking that we have to change the ways. The mudslides in California are going on here, and people need to move out of their old way of being. So here they are crossing this little bridge with all of their worldly goods. Here's another one. We're carrying too much on our backs. We own too much, we consume too much, and we need to lighten up. And so I wanted to, to envision that lightening up, and that there are pathways you can take in this world to kind of make your way out of the mess. It's kind of like chutes and ladders, where you can go up and you can fall down. You can go up and you can fall down. Sky is falling. St. John the Baptist, the sky is falling, our worldly goods are scattering, but I wanted to create a trampoline to maybe push it back up. So again, it can't just be the kind of devastating view of hopelessness. There's got to be, we're very creative creatures, we human animals, and we can find mechanisms for solving problems. There's Jamie Dimon, Lynch. Sorry, Jamie. Retired idols. I wanted to ship out the old idols that weren't working for us anymore and create a different kind of space, of world, saturated in art and good things. And now we're headed to where we are now in the museum. Still coming out of this idea of purging ourselves of the old ways, a kind of a self-portrait as other thief, a kind of, again, purging and reassessment that goes on in these worlds as they're still striving to make their way out. This is the Rockaway Beach that was undercut by water after Hurricane Sandy, and there she is with her, her little hose trying to put out the fire in the tree. Self-portrait is Gatherer, creating the idea of creating new habitats, rethinking habitats are mechanisms for everybody. Using up too many resources as homes are built now is probably not sustainable, or is definitely not sustainable. So I wanted to create a system of shanty towns that are made up of your own personal belongings. In the back is kind of a black mirror showing the chaos, reflecting the chaos that's in our world. Self-portrait is Wrangler, getting herself in the thick of this natural world that's come, that's running amok. I also made a tree that has these little videos inside of knotholes where they take you into these journeys inside the tree. So you travel through these videos deep into the tree. And again, I think here we are in the show out here. I'll just go through these really quickly. This is actually the earlier version of a painting that's out there, or the late. This is the later version of that painting I showed you really early on. That became this painting. Swept to Sea. This is about the refugee problem that was going on in 2016. Root Canal, also about the opening up of the earth, or the raising up of the earth to see what's underneath. And I think that is, a Requiem for Palmyra. ISIS had destroyed the ancient city of Palmyra, so I wanted to honor it with this Requiem. Great acceleration. I'll just go through these really quickly. As things are heating up, it's modeled in this runaway stagecoach, and the mountain itself is kind of sending out its smoke signals to alert us to what's going on. And sky burial. And these last couple are what's going on in my studio now, where the mountains are speaking. Nature is speaking to us, and the latest work has to do with the recognition that the flip side of a lot of the images we see in old master paintings, there's a lot of images of rape, and called abductions. And the flip side of that is these scrolls. She's holding scrolls that sort of show the linear flow of history, one thing after another. The flip side of it being human and animal abuse, human rights abuses and the like. And she's surrounded by powerful women, Rachel Carson, Jane Goodall, Julia Butterfly Hill, etc. And as a response to the Me Too movement, that we have powerful women, powerful people, and that we will figure this out. So that's it.